Political Capital is brought to you by Uber Canada. Learn how Uber and Mad Canada are reducing impaired driving at uber.com/home soon.
CHEK Podcasts.
Hey everyone, and welcome to Political Capital, your source for all the latest in BC politics. My God, what a week, what a series of developments. BC Conservatives changing their leader midstream with a coup, a mutiny, a rebel alliance, whatever you want to call it. John Rustad is out as Conservative leader in a dramatic 24 hours at the legislature. Interim leader Trevor Halford has taken the reins as the party tries to come together after a significant shift in its future. We're going to bring the panel in to break all of this down. We're going to focus on this issue today. There were a lot of other things that occurred this week, but we'll pick them up in another week so we can help you understand this issue. Allie Blades, Jeff Ferrier, Jillian Oliver, all here to take us through this. I want to start with the first clip here from John Rustad. Let's hear what he has to say first.
I think there's plenty of opportunity to have fought this and to go forward and do this, but essentially that's saying I want a civil war. I want to have sides divided. I want to take our party and drag it through a fight. And I just look at that and I think that's not why I built this Conservative Party.
That is John Rustad resigning as leader, saying he could have stayed to fight, but it would have plunged the party into a civil war. You could argue it was already there, but let's just start big picture. We'll start with you, Allie. What do you think of the way that this occurred, how it was handled, and the outcome of this?
I don't know if it's quite accurate to say that he could have stayed and fought this. What moves would you have left after this, after the majority of your caucus has said that they don't have the confidence in you, and that your party management committee had put out a letter weeks ago asking for you to resign? To paint a picture, the party finances, because of John Rustad's inability to fundraise, were actually scary low. The party had received a number of emails saying that they're ripping up their membership. Another big blow to all of this was Mike Harris, who was a somewhat successful Conservative candidate coming in second over the BC United during that transition, is now a 1BC candidate. And so you're seeing people also leave to 1BC. What's scary is that the Conservatives have about a membership of 8,000. 1BC is 50% there, and their party hasn't even been in existence for that long. And so these are some of the dynamics that kind of led to it. The biggest thing that I think we need to all understand is, why was this publicly done versus behind closed doors in a caucus meeting, where it should have been taken care of, arguably. And my understanding is that it was because there was an inability to have this conversation in caucus. John Rustad has been described as being confrontationally adverse to having these conversations. And so these folks decided that they had no other choice. And that's what's really disturbing, is that they felt like they were in a corner and they had to make some drastic decisions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we'll go through some of those decisions in a moment. But Jeff, what did you think of the big picture here of how this played out?
Well, I think it was great to have a person lose their leadership while wearing a snowman tie. You can't snow a snowman, but you can snow a man wearing a snowman tie. Look, I think it's ruthless, risky business that's happening here. You think of John Rustad. I disagree with him fundamentally on a number of policies, and his candidate selection was atrocious. But here's a man who took the BC Conservatives from 0 seats to a few hundred votes away from becoming the government. And in the span of a year, he has fallen really hard, to the point where when he announced his resignation, he was standing by himself in a hallway at the legislature with no supporters with him. So this is, a ruthless way to bring down a leader, and it's risky, and we'll talk about it later, because it may seem bad right now, but you don't know what you're going to get after you open the Pandora's box.
It was a spectacular fall, though. Leaders always end up most of them end up alone at the end, isolated on their way out, and very, very rarely do they get feted and celebrated on the way out the door. Jillian, what did you think of this?
I think that the arguments for keeping Rustad in place had already been lost. I think those arguments were, he was keeping out a more extreme leader from rising, and we're already seeing that happening with One BC, like Allie described. And then also keeping the party from fracturing. I think that's the biggest task for a Conservative Party leader. And he was also losing MLAs to the center with Eleanor Sturco and Amelia Boltby. And I think that the way that was done, blaming it on Boltby's mental health and checking everybody's phones for leaks, I think showed just an absolute inability to be able to hold a caucus together ahead of a next election. And it was far past due. I agree with Allie. I don't think that he could have hung on after the Conservatives named Trevor Halford as leader and put him on the website. I think that, it was obviously untenable.
Mm-hmm. All of those issues that everyone's raised there, the fundraising, the frustration within the caucus at being unable to have a vote on his leadership, the departures of different MLAs, from the firing to people quitting, all those seeming to come to a head because it's the end of the legislative session. The caucus meetings that are supposed to happen get canceled by Rustad in favor of a rib fest and a gingerbread night, the night of the long gingerbread houses, as some people have called it. Leading to this move, we'll go through the mechanics now, of 20 members of the 39-member Conservative caucus signing a declaration of non-confidence, having a special meeting of caucus. Not everyone went. And then the party declaring John Rustad professionally incapacitated, a new term we've never seen in BC politics before, in order to remove him because the board didn't have the mechanism to remove him unless he was dead or incapacitated. That way that this was done, Jeff, we'll just go back to you on that. Was that? Do you think that was fair or a good way to do it, or does that even matter? I guess at a certain point when the mechanism becomes, just an expression of the will of the team that a leader is supposed to lead.
Well, they refer to incapacitated as more like they decapitated the leadership of their party. Nothing's fair in politics, and I don't think this was necessarily fair to Rustad, but that comes with the territory that we're in. I think the interesting point for me, and you raised this with 20 signatures, 20 people expressing no confidence, there were 19 others. So, and I imagine some of those 19 would count themselves as part of the 20, but this feels like the big tent is tumbling. There's internal division within the BC Conservatives. You already see on the right-hand flank the rise of One BC. I hear Trevor Halford, who's a good guy, and I wish him well in his interim role. It's going to be a challenging one. But he talks about stability and the need for stability. And it strikes me that this is the most unstable that this party has been since John Rustad and Bruce Banman were making jokes about rotisserie chickens.
I forgot about that, but that is a good. The chickens have come home to roost, or whatever the phrase is there. Allie, the mechanisms of this. What do you think?
Well, it goes back to what I said earlier. I think that the MLAs thought that this was the only option that they had. This is after a leadership review that had a very small percentage of the membership show up. That would have been like the thing to get rid of John Rustad in accordance to the Constitution in a very legitimate way. But then that ship sailed and the votes were essentially accepted. And so from what I understand, when the leader doesn't want to talk to you about even compromising on, well, what is it going to take for the MLAs to support you? What options do you have left? A couple of weeks ago, there was this story that broke out about John Rustad aligning himself with federal Liberals, and the Conservative members were upset about that. Rather than talking about it and seeing what the path forward is, the leader was MIA. It's why we saw friend of the show, Katie Merrifield, put out a tweet as well that said that, Rustad aligned himself with the federal Liberals and asked that it's time for him to go, and that that she would be willing to work with the new interim leader, Trevor Halford. It's messy, but overall it's because the majority of them felt that there wasn't a path forward. It could also be that they realized that they couldn't win with him as the leader as well. And that goes back to the fundraising and the membership. And that's, while very self-serving for the MLAs, a lot of their success in their ridings is based on the leader and the central campaign. I've made the argument before that while politicians don't like to hear this, they don't win their ridings. In very special cases, does someone like Ellis Ross win his riding, but the brand and the leader and the overall policies, those win overall campaigns.
Mm-hmm. That's why they're so important, for sure. Yeah. Jillian?
I think, it was messy. I think it shows that there's a strong argument for having a mechanism for caucus to have non-confidence votes to remove leaders, which some parties do have. But I also think the fact that the letter that was signed by half of caucus being anonymous, I can also understand from Rustad's perspective why he didn't think that he should step down at that point. I think it speaks to the fear and sort of instability that the MLAs are feeling within the Conservatives, because I think, they thought it could go either way and they didn't want to be on Rustad's bad side if he was able to hold on to power. So I think certainly speaks to what Jeff was talking about just the instability and sort of the internal weakness, and also just reflects how they still are building as a political party that requires a lot of shoring up on the institutional front.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it led to some bizarre scenes at the legislature. Rustad at one point being removed from the website. There's a new interim leader. The party's made its motion and a press release is out. The caucus has their letter, and he just is in the leader's office. He walks up, sits in the chamber in the House in the leader's chair like nothing has ever happened, which was a bizarre scene as people were shouting to MLAs in the hallway, "Do you know who your leader is?" And to be fair, most of them did not. So another extraordinary scene in the legislature, full of them over the years. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about what happens with the new interim leader and what that means right after this.
I'm feeling confident that this caucus is focused on the next chapter ahead, and that's going to be a great leadership race and really making sure that British Columbians know that they have a government in waiting and we're ready to take on that work.
Well, that's interim Conservative leader Trevor Halford pledging to right the ship and present a government in waiting to voters. Boy, that is a tough task. This party is not even close to government in waiting. Can it get there? Let's start there with that. Jillian, is it doomed to be stuck in this cycle of MLAs undermining their leader, or is this a possibility that this can help get the Conservatives to a place where they may be looking like a government in waiting?
I think it's possible, but they got to get through a leadership race first. I would expect that to be quite a wide field. I think, that instability that we were talking about earlier in the show makes the field wide open. I think we'll see people both from within caucus and out of it probably trying to jump in and pulling the party in lots of different directions. We had Eleanor Sturko hinted that she might be interested. We had all other MLAs have been organizing behind the scenes, and also people outside of caucus. So I think it has a chance to be very divisive. It depends on where the grassroots are at and what kind of direction they go and how close or how far away that is from the general electorate. Leadership races are also an opportunity for the other parties to meddle. Looking back at the last BC Liberal leadership race, it was the beginning of the end for them, not just because they went with Kevin Falcon, who was, I think, overly polished and calculated for what the electorate were looking for, but because of the disqualification of Aaron Gunn, which I think a lot of people would say is the beginning of the end of the fracturing of that party. Mm-hmm. So it's going to be really interesting. I'm sure everybody's going to be trying to turn up the volume on it as it goes forward. So they got to get through that first.
Yeah. Jeff, presenting a government in waiting, I know you've tried to do it in opposition in your political career before. That's hard to do. You think the Conservatives can get there by making a move like this?
Well, it's hard to do when you behave like a party that just wants to watch the world burn. My my sense of what the biggest challenge is going to be for the Conservatives in this leadership race is figuring out the grassroots versus the elites. You hear now that there are people who are rubbing their hands. The folks who brought BC Liberals, BC United to be, this group of political operatives who are far removed from the grassroots, saying, now this is our chance to take over the party, take back the party, and make it electable. And meanwhile, on the other side, you have grassroots who are saying, well, actually, we came to this party because we don't want that kind of politics. And it strikes me that in the leadership race, there are going to be candidates representing all of those sides. And it will be interesting to see if the party can come out as a united government in waiting after reconciling those two polar opposites.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's an excellent point. See, I do say that to you, Jeff. I think it was.
Happens sometimes. Happens good, sometimes.
Yeah. Allie, what do you think?
In the case of Trevor Halford as the interim leader, there's an argument to be made on either side of whether or not this is going to be a swift leadership campaign or if they're going to drag it on in order to build membership and raise money. But when it comes to the interim leader, it's unfortunate that he doesn't have a John Rustad that exited gracefully, because there was an opportunity for him to be a Preston Manning type, an advisor, seen as like a grandfather mentor to caucus and potentially like new candidates as well. One of the fundamental issues, and now it's going to come and bite us in the butt for this leadership race, is that Rustad never clearly defined what this party looks like, the messaging, the identity. The argument can be made that it's actually very parallel to Kevin Falcon and how he couldn't define BC United. And for those reasons, where the leadership race ballot box question should be who is going to be the one best suited to defeat David Eby, now there are elements of this conservative purity test of where leadership candidates fall on the political spectrum. I would argue, though, that that's actually a very lazy understanding of what the conservative coalition looks like right now. It's not as easy to describe it as a federal liberal, federal conservative coalition as the BC Liberals were and the BC United were. Rather, it's a membership made up of in the very, very beginning, people who are very upset with all politicians across all political parties. And it's also much younger than in comparison to the BC Liberal membership was. And so these are people who are very angry. And so a word to the leadership candidates, if you start off this leadership campaign with I'm more conservative or I'm more centrist than my counterparts, you've lost the plot completely.
Yeah, there is that OG group versus new group, that sort of blood oath test of, are you a true conservative or are you coming from another party or from another ideology that keeps kind of rearing up in this party that I'm not sure that is helpful in a leadership race, but I guess that's just part of what it is. Let's talk after the break about what this means for a potential early election, because a lot of people then take this issue and extrapolate perhaps the NDP government will do something with it. We're going to get into that with the panel coming up right after this.
Recognizing that British Columbians do not want an election. They want a government that is focused on what their needs are, and that's where we're going to stay focused. We're going to continue to do our work for British Columbians. We do not want an election, but we are ready for one.
Premier David Eby saying he doesn't want an early election, but he's ready for one. He's drawn lines in the sand. Are they serious lines? I guess the question is, Allie, let's start with you on this. How does Rustad's departure change any possibility of an early election call from Premier David Eby, or does it?
Oh my goodness, I love this question, because 2 weeks ago, the NDP could have had a majority in the next election. I don't care what anybody says. I think that the Conservatives were not prepared financially, candidate-wise, or anything that would help them be set up for success for the next campaign. We would have been fighting for 10 seats. Now, they've lost their window, and with a potential, depending on who the new leader is going to be, like we could be in a bit of a fight.
Jeff, what do you think? Does it change it at all, the calculus?
It's tantalizingly tempting, and you want to always when your opponent's on the ground, you want to step on their throat. That's the
it is ruthless.
With
when
folks
you put
in
it that
politics,
way.
this is all about ruthlessness. But I don't think that there's going to be an election call. British Columbians don't want one. David Eby senses that and thinks that there would be pushback, that would be a cynical move. I think this is an election would also give the Conservatives a reason to get their stuff together in a way that's unhelpful to government. The Premier said that he's ready for an election. I think that's more because it's a minor majority and things can change in politics real quick. Party's got the money, party's got the organization and behind a leader, so they're ready to go if they have to.
Sorry, just moving the fourth member of the panel out of the way there. Jillian, what do you think? Any change in calculation?
I agree with Allie. I think they missed the window. I actually wonder, talking about it with you guys, if the choice of Trevor Halford was for that reason. He's very reasonable. I think that an angry electorate that is upset with Eby might feel like he's the safe choice, and that might have been why the Conservatives put him in.
Mm-hmm. It's a tough job. I mean, it's not like people who think Halford is getting some incredible promotion here. He's really kind of taken one for the team in a way. He has no power in a sense. He's got to keep the caucus together and shepherd it through a leadership race. That's a tough one. So I guess the only other question, just really briefly, and I'm going to stick with you, Jeff, on this one. The Premier says he's drawing lines in the sand. Are they the right lines, do you think? And do the lines really exist in a way?
I think the right line is the economy and jobs. That's what he staked his reputation on in his first term as Premier. I think he'd point to the North Coast transmission line and the fact that Conservatives and Greens both voted against it. As you know, it's not a attractive issue or one that folks would care about here. But I think the economy is his line in the sand.
Okay. Well, it's a constant question he's going to get now for a little while on this, and we'll probably talk some more about it. Thank you to the panel for taking us through just a wild week in BC politics. And we'll be back next week with all the latest here on Political Capital. Political Capital is brought to you by Uber Canada. Learn how Uber and Mad Canada are reducing impaired driving at uber.com/homesoon.